Welcome to our masterclass today, entitled Data-Centric Resilience, a data-centric resilience and its relationship with property assets in realizing your academic vision. So the theme underlining while we're looking at our masterclass today is picking up that in these uncertain times, the importance for higher education organizations and to be honest, most organizations to be resilient has never been greater. So what we'll be looking at today. So our agenda for today, we will start with brief introductions. We'll set out what we see the key learnings being from today's session. We will introduce the problem statement, so what we've picked from listening to yourselves as part of the enrollment process. We will introduce the concept of resilience and your built assets. We will then expand a bit further on enhancing resilience. We will then go into discussing the role of data and then the role of asset management, concluding with a set of Q&A with those on the call. Although we will run through the session with minimal interruptions in it, we do welcome any questions being raised during the call. And if we can't answer those at the point they come through, we will pick those up towards the end of the session at the Q&A. So please feel free at any time to post any questions within the chat group. So a quick introduction, who we are. So for those who don't know us, Bureau Happold, we're an international multidisciplinary engineering consultancy. We operate 24 locations worldwide and employ in excess of 1,800 staff. So alongside our core building services, structural and civil engineering offers, which many know us for, we also have expertise in many specialist areas. Specifically, today we're looking at our security, risk and resilience offer, our information management offer, and our asset consulting offer. As well as our standing as an international consultancy, we also are proud to have been awarded the Estates, our Education Estates Consultancy of the Year for the past 2 years consecutively. So who are we? Well, I'll hand you over to my colleagues first of all to introduce themselves, and then I'll introduce myself. So firstly, Bruce.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for taking time to come and join us this evening. My name is Bruce Braze. I'm the director in charge of the security consulting business at Bureau Happold, and have been there since August of last year. I'm been working in the risk and resilience world for probably 35 years now, across most of the world, including all countries in Africa. I'm a director of the ASIS International Professional Standards Board, publishing standards and working with the ISO on various technical committees for their risk and resilience standards. And just to keep me busy in those few hours a month that I have free, I'm the chair of the Southwest chapter of the Institute of Strategic Risk Management. Yeah, I'm a bit of a risky fellow, but I've really enjoyed all my years at it, and I think I can bring you some interesting insights. Thank you. Sean.
Thank you, Bruce. Good afternoon, everybody. As you can see, my name's Sean Farrell. I lead our information management and BIM advisory service. I've spent about 33 years in the industry across architecture, tier 1 contractors, project management, cost management, and now here at Bureau Happold for the last 3 years, working with David in the asset consulting and across all our disciplines, primarily focused on helping clients in large estates, everything from aviation to education, which we're discussing today. Over to you, David.
Again, thank you, Sean. And myself, so David Green. I'm a director within our asset consulting business. Similar to Bruce, I joined within the last year, having joined at the back end of July, so beat Bruce by I think a week or two. I joined the asset consulting team, which is an established team. It's been operating within Buro Household for somewhere in the region of 20 years or more now. We focus predominantly on advising clients on maximizing the value from their existing asset base. My background, I've worked, I would say predominantly, if not solely, in the world of facilities management and asset management, with 20 plus years experience myself. And I currently sit as a committee member on the IWFM's International Special Interest Group. So over to today. So what can you expect to take away from today? So we've got a number of key learnings, some of the immediate takeaways that we hope you can take away with you after today's session. So first of all, we want to highlight the importance of identifying and understanding your risks, understand why scenario testing is applied, mapping in dependencies so as to avoid secondary risks, and also to establish new approaches, more contemporary approaches to managing resilience. We also want to introduce the importance of data in delivering enhanced resilience, look at data and its relationship to aspects such as people, policy, process, and tools, look at the data cycle and maximizing value from your data, and also to become more familiar with the best practice approach to information management underpinning how you use data across your business and your estates transactions. And then concluding that, we will look to help you understand how you can better articulate how your property assets will deliver sustainable value for your business and for your institution. So what have you told us? So firstly, thank you everybody for feeding back your thoughts and comments. As you know, we asked a question as part of the enrollment process for today. That question was, in these uncertain times, the importance for higher education institutions to be resilient has never been greater. In this context, what single most pressing issue impacting your institution's resilience would you like to see addressed during the masterclass? As you can see, we got quite a number of varied responses back from everybody, so thank you for that. As I'm sure you'll appreciate, we're not able to go into each and every one of these individually, but looking through this, I've pulled out what I see as 4 sort of key themes coming from that. These are the role of the physical asset in resilience, the need to be flexible and adaptable, how your existing asset can meet future requirements, and the role of whether that needs retrofitting or repurposing, looking at the resilience in the design of these assets and understanding whether that asset is being utilized to its best efficiency, and importantly, what is the reliability of your asset to be able to underpin your resilience. We've also looked at data and technology as a theme coming through it. We've looked at data strategy, but also some of the key fundamentals of information management around collection, reliability, and governance of data, and also using that data to support knowledge transfer. We see there's also the need for understanding the right application of tools and technologies to ensure that data is used correctly to support your resilience. And also fundamentally how data can support your planning and decision making, and that will come key as we go through this as to how you use data to help secure the business case for change that you want to put forward. There's also the issue around people, particularly around safety, security, and well-being. And then unsurprising in the current climate is maintaining resilience against external factors. So things that are outside of your direct control. So new future models of education that are arising. So the move towards a hybrid teaching model, for example, but also adjusting to post-COVID, and the impact of an uncertain economy that we all see in the market at the moment. So these are some of the issues that came out. For those that may have protected this previously, Bureau Household ran a survey in association with Odd back in September 2020, and we identified a number of key challenges and issues that were identified. These responses were received from over 100 sector experts, mostly estates directors and their deputies. I'm sure some of you will have highlighted or will have contributed to that study as well. But what we see here is there's a real alignment with what were the themes arising shortly after COVID, with where, as we are now gearing up to return to normal, or the new normal, as it seems to have been coined, what those assets are. And as we can see, it's about a post-COVID future where we reset and accelerate change. So looking at new models and new ways of working. There's also attracting and retaining and providing for students. So looking at the people aspect, it's about understanding have you the right space and suitability of space of physical asset, and it's also the importance of data. But one thing that did come up, which is interesting, is the challenges around finances, and actually the access to finances and making the case for change is something we want to pick up on as we go through today's seminar or webinar. So looking at making the case for change, just highlighting some key metrics that we've seen before. You can see that there is the potential for 10 million a year savings in OPEX costs just by looking at better, more efficient utilization of teaching space and the office space that supports that, with up to 48% of teaching space underutilized and 70% being the figure for the academic or non-academic space, so office space within your institutions. There's also significantly more energy being used by buildings at present, with that being reported at 3.5 times higher from a Harvard study. And then we also see from the Green Building Council that you can improve the cognitive function of your workers by investing in high performing buildings. So you can demonstrate that there's energy savings, OPEX savings, and efficiency and productivity benefits that can be had through providing a more resilient workplace. And part of what we'll look at today is building that case for change. So defining resilience in the context of higher education. So I've looked at a number of areas on this when we were pulling this presentation together. So firstly, I just want to throw up a quick reflection back to what you told us. So to us, looking at the higher education and those on the call today, the key things that came out to me, resilience isn't just about one thing. Resilience is about your physical assets, but it's also about access to data and technology. Critically, it's about your people, be those your students or be those your staff, but also there's external factors at play as well, which is having a significant impact on the potential for resilience of your institutions. But across all of those, it is the unhidden fact that resilience will cost money, and it's about understanding how you address the right areas of resilience to maximize your potential investment. So, universities and resilience. In researching this presentation, I came across a paper produced by the Journal of Green Building in 2019, and it was an article by an organization called Hambury, who are a US architectural firm, entitled "Developing a Resilience Tool for Higher Education Institutions." And in that paper, Hambury identified some themes that were carried out, or some findings carried out by another organization, Haley and Aldridge, who are a US environmental and engineering firm. And they found that many universities and colleges are only in the early stages of understanding resilience issues, and that universities are lacking in many areas when making whole system resilience planning a top priority. And we'll talk later about systems of systems approach and looking at a holistic view around that. But also Hambury themselves identified that higher education institutions will have to make trade-offs when it comes to resilience implementations, and the role of data will play an important role in understanding which trade-offs you need to make. And in doing that, this really puts data at the heart of resilience planning. But also in that same paper, or in a separate paper, we found PA Consulting through a happy blog highlighted that we shouldn't underestimate the resilience of our universities. So this is forward-looking and saying that while the transition will be painful for many, adopting a resilience approach in the sector could see it emerge more agile, more innovative, and stronger than before. So we've all seen the need for resilience at close hand over the last, I would say last months, but actually it's been the last year. And what have we learned from COVID? One of the key things that's come up there, and you can see two of these key metrics actually relate to people, highlighting it's not just the buildings that will mean that we're resilient, but it's actually how the buildings serve our people and how our institutions serve our people. And you can see that there's significant impact as a result of COVID on both students and staff. So concluding our definition of resilience, I also looked at a paper by David Rozowski entitled Defining Resilience, the University Edition. And in this paper, he looked at drawing parallels between institutions, such as universities, and physical infrastructure systems, such as your building campuses. And what he identified is that whether you're an institution or whether you're a physical asset, you are complex. You're made up of interconnected and independent elements and subsystems. The design of these systems, whether you're an institution or physical assets, should implicitly or explicitly address many different facets of resilience. He also recognized that either as an infrastructure system, such as an electricity power grid, or as a university, you are connected through a systems of systems integration, and Bruce will talk more on that later. And then finally, also identifying that the approach to risk is the same. It's about balancing operational and economic risk, judging your specific risk tolerance and identifying the level of risk transfer you're comfortable with. So what this really pulls out to me is drawing the similarities, looking at both the resilience of your buildings, so looking at the reliability of your services infrastructure at one hand, to also institutional resilience, so understanding how does your buildings then support resilience of your institution, so looking at some of those wider institutional factors at play. So to me, it's about integrating data-centric resilience planning and strategic estates planning to better evidence the vital role your property assets play in realizing your academic vision. I will now hand you over to Bruce, who will talk you through how enhancing value can be achieved through resilience. Oops, I'm hoping we haven't lost Bruce. I know.
Thanks.
Oh, you're
up. Thanks, David.
You're connected.
Thanks very much there, David. And it really interesting lead in. A couple of things struck me very, very clearly there was in your last slide, you talk about things being complex, you talk about them being interconnected, and you talk about them being interdependent. Those are all things that I'm going to talk about as I go through my part of this conversation now. But as you'll see from the slide, I'm going to start off with what I talk about is understanding vulnerabilities. So for an organization to be resilient, the first thing they have to do, they need to understand their risks. Unfortunately, in many organizations today, the good old enterprise risk management framework has taken control, and the more fundamental operational risk management factors have been overridden by big compliance issues. Now, to maintain a resilient campus, you are going to have to really focus back onto that operational risk side of things. And for me, it's quite simple. Operational risk has got three major components to it: threat, asset, vulnerability. So, every asset is faced by a threat, and the only way that the threat can turn itself into a risk is by taking advantage of a vulnerability. And if we don't understand what those vulnerabilities are, we're going to find ourselves with more and more of those threats turning into risks, which are going to turn into disruptive events. And that's what we want to try and make sure that we get away from. Now, removing the vulnerability reduces the risk, but how do we go about doing that? It's about understanding where our single points of failure are, or where our multiple points of failure are, as we get to talk about it. And the problem that most organizations have going forward is that we don't like to admit that we have weaknesses. But at the end of the day, it's the painful truth that if we are not able to accept the fact that we have vulnerabilities which open us to threat actors, which could result in an impact that brings a disruptive event, we are never going to be able to deal with these things and become a truly resilient campus, organization, institution, or whichever we like to talk. So I'm a great believer in understand the vulnerabilities. Those are the weak points. Those are the places that are going to cause the pain. You're never going to be able to shut them all down at once, but at least if you know what they are and you understand what they are, you have a far better chance of being able to manage those. So that's my opening gambit there. Understand your vulnerabilities. So I'm going to move on now to visualizing the impacts of vulnerabilities. What if scenarios? Many of you have probably got a risk register gathering dust somewhere on one of your shelves, as most of them do. And the reason that I bring that up is that the vast majority of risk registers are completed to satisfy some sort of compliance requirement. Compliance requirements are one thing, real life, lights off, doors locked is another thing altogether. So we need to start thinking about our vulnerabilities and visualizing what's going to happen if that vulnerability were to be subjected to an attack, if I can put it that way. And the only way to do that is to use the what if scenario. So what if 2 + 2 = 8? Because lots of people have a difficulty in understanding that if you, for instance, talk about the collapse of the manhole on Egan Street, because nobody has actually fulfilled the preventative maintenance schedule on that manhole, what are the impacts of that going to be? Well, what if that manhole covers the main fiber optic cable between the two major hubs of your campus? And what happens if somebody who goes through that manhole actually smashes the fiber optic cable? And what if during that outage, your major research project, which has brought in 80% of the funding for your particular department, is disturbed because the information feed goes down? So all of a sudden now, from talking about a small manhole that the cover is broken on a street in an inconspicuous part of, say, Liverpool, we're now talking, as we what if the scenario, to a situation where the department is going to potentially lose 80% of its funding. And that is the way we've got to look at things, because as this year has shown us, what we think we are dealing with at an immediate point when an event occurs is quite often just the tip of the iceberg. It's the 20% of the iceberg that is sitting above the water And it's the 80% of the iceberg that lies beneath the surface that we should really be worrying about. So that's why we're great proponents of scenario modeling, talking about what if happens, what if this happens, what if that happens, what if the next happens. And why is that so important? Next slide, please, David. Well, this is a very simplified spider web of a university, Arizona State University. Thanks to them for providing this. But as you can imagine, that is very, very diagrammatic. But universities, higher education establishments are literally spiders' webs. And one of the things that causes the major problems for organizations of this sort is that we don't actually understand the interdependencies. We don't realize how the transport hub in this diagram is actually going to be affected if there is a problem with, for instance, the mobile payment system. It's a very simple scenario, but one of the things that we've found in work that we have done previously using a tool called mood modeling is that if we look at the architecture of an organization, and we say to ourselves, okay, fine, if we pull on this strand, what does it actually do? And I would almost guarantee you that 80% of organizations across the UK in all sectors, and I'm being quite open about this, it's not only the higher education area, have no idea what the run-on, what the house of cards effect is going to be when you pull on that thread. And I'll use an example from a previous project that I worked with, where I worked with the Ministry of Defence, and they were doing a design change on one of their vehicles, and somebody decided that instead of putting the seat 17 centimeters from the buttress, they were now going to put it 15 centimeters from the buttress. What they hadn't actually thought or understood about the whole thing was that that vehicle was also used by units that transport dogs. And the dog cage had been designed to go into a 17 centimeter space. So by moving the seat 2 centimeters, they ensured that no dog cages could ever be transported in those vehicles again. So what appeared to be a very, very tiny little change in one place meant that the whole of the EOD dog sections vehicles had to be back engineered again once the change had been taken place. So these are the things that we need to talk about. These are the things that we need to think about. It's an art to be able to sit there and backtrack what everything, you know, what leads, what does this do? What does this do? What does this do? What does this do? And it is time consuming, but you would be amazed at how the knowledge base of your organization increases by actually understanding the full ins and outs and interdependencies of an organization. Thank you, David. Next one. And how do we do that? Well, the way to do that is to adopt a systems approach. Dave mentioned it earlier on when he started the introduction. Your education establishments, your universities, colleges, or whatever they may be, are massive, intertwined, interconnected organizations. They are complex rather than complicated. And what is the difference? Why do I use those two words? Well, complex breeds uncertainty. It means that there is uncertainty in the situation. Complicated is a different thing altogether. So what we're saying is that if we adopt a systems approach, and on the screen here, you'll see how if we talk about hardware engineering, working with systems engineering, which has to be project managed, which needs to satisfy the enterprise management process. By using a systems approach, where we use all the systems to concentrate on getting to ourselves to a goal, we make things a lot easier because we break out of this silo mentality. we start to share knowledge, we start to share innovation, and that is what's going to make all the difference. Because what we want to be doing is we want to be solving the right problem, but we also want to be solving the problem right, if that makes sense to anyone. And what I mean by that is that we may be able to solve a small problem in our own little node, but that same problem is quite likely to be present across the whole of the organization, the whole of the enterprise. So if we solve the problem right, we're going to solve it for the whole organization. So I think what I'm going to just finish off by saying here is that organizations have massive amounts of data. We don't use them as well as we could. We need to use data because it's the most beneficial way for us to make better informed decisions. Right? And how do we do that? We do that by combining the power and the resources of these big organizations that you work with, but by being agile, adaptable, and using small teams of highly motivated and intelligent people to be able to dig down, find those weak spots, find those vulnerabilities, see what they lead to, see what happens when you pull on the thread, so you have a full understanding of what you're doing when you go into the beginning of a project. Because I've seen it a million times. The project starts and the knock-on from that project probably negates all the good value that it was going to bring to start with. Thank you very much, David.
Thank you, Bruce. And I will now hand over to Sean, who will talk to you about how to make your data work for you.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Bruce. So you're going to hand control to me, David? There we go. Thank you very much. That's going to be a big act to follow, but I will do my best. I'm going to take you through some examples and approaches to how we can address the large topics that both David and Bruce have introduced us to, and break it down into some steps that you can take and that we help our clients take as well on many a project. So many of you are already aware. I mean, if I was to ask you, what data do you have? Many estates already have data. They've got lots of it. They see it spread across many different systems, many different departments, very many platforms. Different organizations are at different points on their maturity of these sorts of things. Some are planning to do these systems. Some have legacy systems. Some are being approached by resellers to say, we have something to answer all your problems, when they haven't even asked you yet, what's your question that we're answering? They come up with these lovely shiny things and saying, this is the problem. Typically, these are the silos of information. There are many more, but for the purpose of this, we thought we'd limit it down to some of the more typical ones that you identified in your responses, which is to say, how can you look at all these? And as Bruce said, this is classically that systems of systems. You're never going to get one system or platform to do all this. So quite often, and it's quite typical, we look at what's the solution to bring all these together to see what's going on before then saying we need to go and get another system. So quite a lot of it is actually looking at how do we join these things together. So the key part is we always say start with the end in mind. So we all know we have data. That data needs to be processed to be turned into information, which is where information management comes in. And then this generates insight and advice. When it's all well and good, as I've just said, we don't really want to start that way, saying, oh, look, we've got all this data, what can we do with it? That's that delivery of information. What you actually want to do is look at the end, look at your outcomes and saying, what is it we want to know? And then dig backwards through the advice you get, the insight you get, to be able to say, well, where do we get the information from? Are we collecting it? Is it in paper? Is it in people's heads? Or are it in these disparate systems we have that you may not even own? I mean, that's where it does start to get interesting. Is so far we've shown systems where you are, it's in your domain. Sometimes you need to connect to platforms or sources of data that you don't own. For instance, delivery companies. Sometimes they will open that area so that you can actually get an insight into deliveries in their cycle and their stock to enable you to plan for your spares, etc. So I always look at to be able to say, well, it's great you understand your delivery, but have you ever done your discovery and work backwards? So if we're going to talk about resilience, the thing that's on everybody's mind is COVID. And many of you have seen, there have been positive stories about data around the COVID problem, and there's been negative stories about data. One of my favorite ones is just using a different version of Excel. I'm not sure if anybody saw that one, but if you use the old version of Excel, you run out of data at 62,000 rows, where if you use the new version, it's almost infinite. So that was only spotted because somebody was looking for a record that wasn't there, and they realized because of the file format, the data got lost. I could ask the question, why were you doing Excel in the first place? But let's not get into that one. But we look at how, with this, you can see in this example, you've got distancing, you've got, well, you still need to get people taught. Then say, well, what's our chances for remote working? What's our chances for using telepresence? What are our chances for being able to actually get people working in different time zones? Then it leads on to, as both Bruce and David Green saying, sometimes to look at this not as a crisis, but as an opportunity to expand on how can you engage with your different stakeholders, not just the students, but your lecturing, your facility staff, and seeing it as an opportunity to push these things forward. We've certainly seen it ourselves here at Bureau Happo for the nature of our own working from home strategy. We've pushed certain technologies that were going to be spread over a 2-year period and compressed it into a 2-month period. And they've been very successful, but not without their own stresses and strains. So again, to actually look at all these things in the context of one another is a very powerful thing to do. And I may well have dismissed the platforms before, but they do have their place. Once you start systemizing your data, and I'll come on to that in the next slide, you could actually then start looking at, well, what if scenarios, rather than being reactive, being able to be proactive, and to actually then capture the data you want to know to say, well, how is it performing? How do we think it's performing? Do some measurements and then do some predictive maintenance, or start looking at saying, well, it says we're supposed to check every 6 months, but in actual fact, we only need to check every 5 years. So there's a lot of, we've deliberately used the honeycomb image of things that can be joined together that are adjacent, that might not actually be in the same pot, but there are ways to bring them together through many, there's technical approaches, there's process approaches, there's review of platforms, because if some of your platforms are coming to end of life, you've got the opportunity to transform them. I mean, we're doing work with 2 large universities where the first step is to say, what are all the systems you've got? How old are they? What's your plan for keeping them in place, or replacing them or updating them? I did do work with one client who the only place they could get spares for their hardware was on eBay, because they didn't make that hardware anymore. So those people who've had systems for a long time are well aware of the problems of keeping software up to date and hardware up to date. But the nice thing is that when we start looking at this picture, the power to simulate, do scenario planning, as well as doing the monitor, test, and refine without actually having to go and make physical change is very powerful indeed. So how do we actually get to these points? People keep talking about data, but there are these other 4 key elements that operate around that data. Data on its own just sits there and does nothing, has no value unless you engage people in both its use and its creation, you wrap a process around its generation, and you include those people in that process. You get the right tools for the job, and that's not buying a multi-million pound platform. It could be as simple as, let's agree to use the same Excel template when collecting data to allow us to federate that into a visual report. And then the tough one that many people do is they don't then embed this in policy. So you see a lot of organizations whose process and tools are a suggestion, rather than it being a policy to support that business decision, which is to say, if it's that important and that critical to your business, govern it, and govern it well. So around that, looking at when we're going to do an information roadmap, we want to look at, you've got to define, govern, and utilize. Now, I showed you in the diagram right at the beginning, there's 2 ways of looking at this, is that we can look at what we want to utilize first, which is to say, well, how could technology help us? Or what can we do with what we have? So that's interesting when people look at that, is that the true nature of innovation is doing more with what you have, not necessarily inventing something new. And I think a lot of people miss that step, thinking, oh, what we've got is too old, we can't innovate based on what we've got, when actually you can. And then is to look at, what platforms are required and how do you continually improve, because it's no good. And we see this on many clients where they instantiate something, go great, hand over, fantastic, we're off. But then over the next couple of years, it degrades because there's no ongoing maintenance and ongoing governance, because that's not been defined as a requirement of the business to keep the business operating. There's been no value associated to that data. And then you could turn around and say, well, if there's no value to that data, why are you collecting it anyway? And there are many types of data. There could be regulatory, your business needs, operational needs, sales, all sorts of different approaches to different types of data. The good thing is that some of it will share a common thread to it, which is to say it can be used for multiple reasons. You don't have to go and do separate data exercises. The key one for me, though, is that one in the middle, is that governance. Is that the moment you find somebody works with data and they find out it's either not accurate, it's out of date, or it's not robust, and you've not told them that limitation, then you then completely devalue your platform. But many of the approaches we do with clients, I did one with a large national infrastructure, is to say that let's put all the data in, but we'll actually say the quality of it. And then when people are looking at it, they can understand what they can do with it. Rather than dismiss it, they go, yeah, it's 10 years old. I'll operate on a 10-year-old decision. But if I want to then say, right, I could really do with that data being current, you then put that into your governance definition to actually then say, right, that's now a valuable piece of data. Let's carry that forward. And then just everybody loves these sorts of things, is to show different ways of visualizing this in a web-based platform. A lot of these are dependent on, well, yes, it's great to have this, but what question were you answering? And each of these scenarios are answering a specific question. The one in the left, bottom left, is about occupancy. There's another one which shows about distances and travel distances. All these things were responses to different questions, and we were making that data work for them. So I'm hopeful that's giving you an insight into how you actually get the data behind it to enable you to do all these great things we're talking about. And I think that's me handing you over to you now, David. I think I've gone one slide on. I apologize.
Whoops, sorry, Sean. I think it was controlled. Hopefully that's all okay now. So understanding, I'll just go back a slide, apologies. So what we're looking at is, what is the role of assets in creating value and sustainable business advantage? So we've looked at the themes of resilience, and we've looked at the role that data plays in. But I am also very well aware that one of the challenges that is facing organizations of all kinds is being able to define the business case for change and secure the funding to deliver the investment needed to transform and enhance your estate to provide the resilience that you need. So what I'm interested in looking at in the following slides is how we take that information and go about that. So for me, we'll clearly articulate how your property assets can continue to deliver sustainable value for your business. You need to consider a series of questions at each stage of the cycle. And for me, the cycle is about visioning, planning, implementing, and delivering. So looking at the visioning stage, which to me is the strategic thinking, what we want to understand is, or the question you should be asking yourself, I should say, is how are we currently positioned to optimize our existing assets to deliver sustainable business value? So to me, what I see critical here is about embedding resilience at the heart of your estate strategy. I mentioned that earlier on in the presentation. It's about aligning this with your core corporate objectives. So in the context of higher education, this is about enhancing the student experience, looking at high performing buildings. It's about the safety and well-being of your student population and your staff. It's about the impact that a hybrid learning environment is going to bring, and looking at the efficient spatialization. And in all organizations, it's about the net zero agenda and the decarbonization of your estate. So these are all key objectives which are both impact on your property, but also are institutional-wide decisions that your organization will be looking at, and being able to tie your property into those and demonstrate the resilience of your organization to meeting these challenges will be key. Also, how do you define the role of the asset in optimizing resilience? So what is the role assets play in a hybrid learning future? So it's not just looking at your campus in the role that it fulfills today in providing teaching space, providing focus space for research, providing the variable sociable spaces for interaction and sharing of ideas. The purpose of your asset will change when you move to a potential hybrid learning environment. So what does that mean? What is the purpose of the building? If it's no longer to deliver face-to-face lectures or to deliver a reduced amount of face-to-face lectures, what will it do and what will it need to serve? So being able to define what role the asset plays in meeting that changing dynamic across your institution will be critical to you. But also, how do you adopt an information management strategy that empowers informed decision making? It is critical that you have clarity on the questions that you want the data to answer, as Sean rightly pointed out. Looking at that discovery phase, so starting at the end, understanding what challenges you are trying to address, because to many organizations, data for data's sake is a poor strategy. So what we want to understand is that you're collecting data with a purpose, and that purpose is to address the key challenges and issues that you're facing. But most importantly, and this ties into Bruce's views around the systems of systems approach, is to take a whole holistic view of investment, not just at a portfolio level, but drilling down into a building and project level and aligning spend with the resilience needs and ultimately your corporate objectives. That is something that we've looked at in the past as a business, and we've worked with an educational institution in the past. And one of the things we've looked at is a holistic thinking around investment in improvements to the facade of a building. So this wasn't just looked at as delivering a direct upgrade to the aesthetics of the building by enhancing the facade, but actually what we were able to do is tie in that investment in the facade to delivering not just aesthetic benefits, but environmental benefits. So improvement in air quality, thermal comfort, light, etc. But also stepping that down and showing what those improvements in the environment will also bring forward a positive effect on the experience of your staff and your students, both looking at issues around health and well-being, but also enhancing productivity, and then taking that experience and the positive benefits that bring, and showing that a healthier, more fit for purpose environment and a more productive environment can deliver financial benefits as well. And I'll touch on that later as we address some of the other questions that we believe we need to answer. So what this shows is through our experience, you can look to demonstrate the investment needed in physical structures, but being able to demonstrate the benefits that have to other key resilience issues across your institution. So the second question around the planning stage is you need to ask yourself is, how do we best utilize our existing assets to ensure that they enhance value and deliver improved business performance? So here, this is about incorporating the application of data and technology to deliver the MI required that underpins the business case. It's about fact-based decision-making and also the incorporation of scenario modeling. So being able to use the data to run scenarios to demonstrate the benefits that investment can bring. It's about designing bespoke solutions that deliver resilience and improve value and respond to the culture and needs of your user. So actually take the student experience, for example. How can you enhance student experience to maintain the attractiveness of your university, to maintain its viability moving forward? So look at solutions that deliver against that. So what you're not doing is just not going out and looking investment to improve the environment, but actually it's tying that back into what that means for the student experience. And data can help you do that. You can look and understand what are the benefits of doing that, being able to base that on real data, and as I said, based on fact-based decision, but also using historical information to run various scenarios. it's about specifying and evaluating investment needs, and being able to tie those to a return of investment. Utilize the data that you have at hand to quantify that return of investment. This is a key theme that runs through this. But also taking a utilization perspective to better articulate the business case for change, be that delivering net zero, be that enhancing the student experience and well-being. But also, as we touched on in that last slide where I showed the holistic view, you can also look at linking wellness standards to growth and research grants. That's a scenario that we mapped out in some of our scenario planning around investments before. And what we've seen here is that looking at carrying out a user perception survey, we were able to identify that users of an institution felt that their productivity was 12.5% lower than it could be in a more fit for purpose environment. So we're able to identify that bringing a fit for purpose environment has the potential to deliver a 12.5% increase in productivity. So this specific institution we were looking at, we're able to tie that back into their capacity to deliver further research, and therefore improve the income they receive from research activity. So in this instance, it was about being able to show a potential cash benefit of 2 million through increased income by being more productive and being able to deliver an enhanced volume of research activity, with research grants being a core source of funding. So these are all real issues that you can use data to address and improve your resilience. Looking at the next stage, which is about implementing the solutions and about creating the conditions for successful delivery. So again, in this one, it's the question you ask yourself is, how do we create the conditions to successfully manage the implementation and delivery of our change programs in delivering enhanced resilience? So fundamental at the basis of this is developing a robust implementation plan, but it's also rolling out a data taxonomy and technology platform that delivers the information needed to underpin your resilience planning and your business case. So what data do you need? Where will that data come from? How compliant does that data need to be? What are the quality issues sitting underneath that? There's also about establishing and implementing robust procedures for monitoring and assessing your performance, linking this back to resilience as well. But one of the key features in this stage is not just an implementation plan, but an investment plan that meets your operational needs as well as responding to the wider objectives. For us, one of the things that we see that allows planning is about visualizing data and using data to develop visuals that help you understand. And I'll show this quick image, which is something that we produced not for an education authority, but another major institution, around helping them visualize their services infrastructure to inform their decision making. This helps, as Bruce outlined before, about being able to visualize where major services distribution routes are and understanding which areas are critical and need focus and attention. So the scenario of a collapsed manhole bringing down your data network, these are areas that would be able to highlight where those critical infrastructure routes are passing. So these are all clever ideas that you can take your data and you can help that with visualizing what that means for you and your estate. So looking at the next question, or the next question you need to ask yourself, is at the delivery stage. And here you should be saying, how during the process of transformation and returning to business as usual do we adopt control measures which safeguard compliance through the application of knowledge and technical expertise? So for us, that's utilizing data and technology to safeguard your needs by tracking and verifying outcomes, using or adopting procedures that monitor operational compliance, and when things do go wrong, be able to take a forensic investigation, but most importantly, follow this up with producing a rectification plan and looking at things such as a deep dive analysis, but also, and very importantly, ongoing lessons learned, and ensuring that those lessons learned are communicated and people get to benefit from those findings. But also there's the provision of accurate and timely information to inform decision making. So the delivery phase is not just the end of the project, it's the beginning of the next project. So are you able to capture that information to inform and demonstrate how success is being delivered, but also to capture information that informs future thinking and driving forward with your next initiatives. So here it's about being able to adopt bespoke reporting tools, be that business intelligence dashboards or other applications of similar nature. At Bureau Happold, we have an application called SmartFizz, which draws on data from many different sources to be able to produce real-time interactive dashboards for clients to be able to assess their performance. We built this for a major corporation previously, and it was about developing a tool backed by a central database. It was about looking for opportunities to automate the process to ensure that data was flowing through into a reporting tool that provided an interactive reporting and analysis platform. And it allowed the users to explore and analyze and compare their estate performance and make effective data-driven decisions. Similarly, this same data helped demonstrate how the building was being used, not just looking at a portfolio level as the first image represented, but also being able to drill into individual floor plates and look at the utilization of that space. And ultimately, what we were able to deliver for that client was the information they needed to inform their decisions around the reconfiguration and use of their space. That both enhanced productivity by 12%, reduced space by 37%, delivered 67% improvement in CO2 emissions, and ultimately led to a £40 million saving on an annual basis from their current operational spend. So these are all key areas where data can support in your decision making going forward. So that brings us to the end of the presentation. Hopefully you've been able to get a flavour of the role resilience will play across your estate and your institutions. Understand resilience is not just about your physical asset and maintaining the resilience of your asset, but understanding that that asset plays a significant part in the resilience of your institution as a whole, and understanding that the different approaches to resilience planning and the critical role that data plays in that, and then being able to use that data to inform your business case for change that helps you put forward the case to make change happen across your estate, tying that back in not just to the resilience of your estate, but actually the resilience of your institution as a whole.